Stop, 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 he cried. Stop talking for a minute, for I see half. Will God give me strength? Will my brain make the one jump and see all? Heaven help me. I used to be fairly good at thinking. I could paraphrase any page in Aquinas once. Will my head split, or will it see? I see half. I only see half.
He buried his head in his hands and stood in a sort of rigid torture of thought or prayer, while the other three could only go on staring at this last prodigy of their wild 12 hours. When Father Brown's hands fell, they showed a face quite fresh and serious like a child's. He heaved a huge sigh and said,
"Let us get this said and done with as quickly as possible. Look here, this will be the quickest way to convince you all of the truth."
He turned to the doctor.
"Dr. Simon," he said, "you have a strong headpiece, and I heard you this morning asking the 5 hardest questions about this business. Well, if you will ask them again, I will answer them."
Simon's pince-nez dropped from his nose in his doubt and wonder, but he answered at once.
"Well, the first question, you know, is why a man should kill another with a clumsy sabre at all, when a man can kill with a bodkin." "A man cannot behead with a bodkin," said Brown calmly, "and for this murder beheading was absolutely necessary."
"Why?" asked O'Brien with interest.
"And the next question?"
asked Father Brown.
"Well, why didn't the man cry out or anything?"
asked the doctor.
"Sabres in gardens are certainly unusual."
"Twigs," said the priest gloomily, and turned to the window which looked on the scene of death.
"No one saw the point of the twigs. Why should they lie on that lawn? Look at it, so far from any tree. They were not snapped off. They were chopped off. The murderer occupied his enemy with some tricks with the sabre, showing how he could cut a branch in mid-air or what-not. Then, while his enemy bent down to see the result, a silent slash and the head fell." "Well," said the doctor slowly, "that seems plausible enough. But my next 2 questions will stump anyone."
The priest still stood looking critically out of the window and waited.
"You know how all the garden was sealed up like an airtight chamber?"
went on the doctor.
"Well, how did the strange man get into the garden?"
Without turning round, the little priest answered,
"There never was any strange man in the garden."
There was a silence, and then a sudden cackle of almost childish laughter relieved the strain. The absurdity of Brown's remark moved Ivan to open taunts.
"Oh," he cried, "then we didn't lug a great fat corpse onto a sofa last night. He hadn't got into the garden, I suppose." "Got into the garden?"
repeated Brown reflectively.
"No, not entirely." "Hang it all," cried Simon. "A man gets into a garden or he doesn't." "Not necessarily," said the priest with a faint smile. "What is the next question, Doctor?" "I fancy you're ill," exclaimed Dr. Simon sharply. "But I'll ask the next question if you like. How did Brain get out of the garden?" "He didn't get out of the garden," said the priest, still looking out of the window. "Didn't get out of the garden?" exploded Simon. "Not completely," said Father Brown.
Simon shook his fists in a frenzy of French logic.
"A man gets out of a garden or he doesn't," he cried. "Not always," said Father Brown.
Dr. Simon sprang to his feet impatiently.
"I have no time to spare on such senseless talk," he cried angrily. "If you can't understand a man being on one side of a wall or the other, I won't trouble you further." "Doctor," said the cleric very gently, "we have always got on very pleasantly together. If only for the sake of old friendship, stop and tell me your 5th question."
The impatient Simon sank into a chair by the door and said briefly,
"The head and shoulders were cut about in a queer way. It seemed to be done after death."
"Yes," said the motionless priest.
"It was done so as to make you assume exactly the one simple falsehood that you did assume. It was done to make you take for granted that the head belonged to the body."
The borderland of the brain, where all the monsters are made, moved horribly in the Gaelic O'Brien. He felt the chaotic presence of all the horsemen and fishwomen that man's unnatural fancy has begotten.